Alright, now let's talk a little bit about transitions. First though, I'm going to make this middle content section bigger by default. So we don't have our footer scrunched up to our header like this. Ooh, that's too big. Okay, that'll do. So Vue has a built-in system for handling animations or transitions specifically. So as you can see right now, if I click on one of these router views, they just kind of clip in and out. They're super fast, super reactive, which is awesome, but there's no flash. So if you're into animation or transitions, hover effects, all that kind of thing, then this should be especially useful to you. But the way in which Vue supports animations and transitions is with a built-in element called a transition element. I'm going to just clean up my code a little bit here so it's easier to read. The way transition elements work is they can contain one element. They can contain one element. The element inside can of course have as many as you'd like, but a transition can only have one child. Okay, so think about that. Make sure you understand what that means. You can put an unordered list inside a transition, but you cannot put a number of list items inside a transition. Those list items must be inside the unordered list, which is inside the transition. Okay, the transition can only have one child. So the place I would use a transition element in this case, you might think you would use one inside each of these templates, and you could. You could. If you wanted each of these to have a different kind of animation when they show up, you could. You could do that. But I'm going to try to be smart about this and instead simply use my transition element to contain my router view element. Okay. Now that we've done that, we want to give our transition element instructions, which is to say we want to tell it how to animate the content inside of it when it either shows up or disappears or changes. Okay, so to do that, we give our transition element a name property, and I'm going to call this slide fade. This is actually a really common animation used in Vue and vue-router. So if you wanted to, you could look it up and find the code for it very, very easily, but I'm going to show it to you here. Okay, now that we've given our transition a name, slide fade, we want to come into our CSS and actually define what slide fade means, what it's going to do. So in using a transition element, what the Vue instance is actually doing is taking the elements inside that transition and applying to it different class names in sequence. Okay, so those class names might look like slide fade, our name, enter, and slide fade leave, and slide fade enter active, and slide fade leave active. Okay, if this seems intimidating, it's not. It looks much worse than it actually is. There are actually quite a few other classes that it applies to its elements in sequence, so if you wanted to really precisely get in there and very carefully doctor how your animations look, you could do that. And I encourage any of you interested in that to do some research and look up all that you can about Vue's transition elements, because they are amazing. For our purposes, however, we're going to just create a very simple animation. For our purposes, these are the four that we're really interested in. So this is the name that we chose, enter, leave, enter active, and leave active. I'm sorry, it's not leave, it's leave to. There we go. Now, slide fade enter is going to be the class which tells the instance how does this element look at the very start of the animation. Slide fade leave to tells the instance how does this element look at the very end of our animation when it's leaving. Okay, so when it's entering, how does it look at the start of the animation? And when it's leaving, how does it look at the very end of the animation? In most cases, these are going to be exactly the same. So think about it for a second. If you want an element to fade in, then it's going to start from an opacity of 0. And if you want an element to fade out, it's going to end at an opacity of 0. So as a result, the enter and leave to transition classes are usually going to be exactly the same. Usually. Okay? By the same token, slide fade enter active and slide fade leave active are usually going to be exactly the same. What these classes do is allow you to determine how long the animation is going to take with the transition property. So if you're familiar with CSS animations or hover effects, you should know about the transition property. But I'm going to set this to 5 seconds and ease. Simple as that, okay? Enter and leave to are usually the same. Enter active and leave active are usually the same. They don't have to be. We can, get really creative with this. But for right now, we're keeping it simple. Okay, now that we've done that, we are ready to see some of our animations. Okay? So I'm going to reload my page, make sure that I'm starting from the home page. Click link 1. Oh, it's not working. Slide fade enter, slide fade leave to, enter active, leave active. Let's see, am I throwing an error? No error. Oh, okay, now it's working. It's funny, maybe I just reloaded too fast. Okay, well now we can see the actual transitions taking effect. See, each batch of content takes about half a second, and that's from that transition property, to fade out, and half a second to fade in. Now, this is cool and all, but it's unfortunate that we're seeing two elements render at the same time while these animations are happening, right? That's not what we want. We want it to be smooth. We want them one after the other. So to ensure that that's happening, we're going to come back to our transition element, and we're going to give it an additional attribute of mode, and this is going to have a value of out in. This is going to ensure that only one animation is happening at a time. Okay, now it's working. There we go. Not sure what that's about, why it takes like a solid 10 seconds for my site to actually update. But I'm sure that's an issue on my end. It's not related to the code. In any case, as we can now see, the animation actually waits for instance, when I go from link 1 to link 2, the browser waits for link 1 to completely fade out before it starts fading in link 2. And that means we don't get two stacking elements for a hot half second. Okay, so now our animations are working nice and fluidly. It's nice. I like it. So that's the transition property. the transition element, the mode out in causes it to wait until the previous animation has finished to begin the next one. The name determines the name of the animation, which you will then define in your CSS. And an example of how we could get a little bit more creative with this is, let's change the fade enter, fade leave to a little bit. Let's go 40 pixels. If you're not familiar with the transform property, it's super useful and I recommend it. And let's also split these up a little bit. So I'm going to take, I'll take leave active. I'm going to change the timing on this one. So it's going to take a little bit longer to fade in than it will to fade out. And this translate X is going to move it 40 pixels from the right. So it's going to start 40 pixels to the right, and it's going to move to the left. So let's see what that's going to look like. Once again, looks like we're going to have to wait a second. There we go. Okay. Okay, that's working. I like that transition. It is, however, messing with our window a little bit, causing a scroll bar to appear at the right and kind of shifts everything. The reason for that is in moving this content 40 pixels to the right, it's actually overflowing our body. So let's go ahead and take care of that with just a little basic CSS. Overflow X hidden. Reload. There we go. Nice and smooth. None of that shifting because of the scroll bar. And there we go. They fade out to the right, and they fade in from the right. Cool. Okay, now let's see, what if we wanted to change the direction? Let's say they fade out to the left and fade in from the right. Well, I'm going to change fade leave to. Exact same properties, except there's going to be minus 40 pixels. Fade out to the left, fade in from the right. There we go. How's that? Okay, so that's, you can put as much content in here as you would like, an entire web page's worth of content in there, and have it change reactively and compellingly using these transition elements in combination with vue-router. So once again, we wrapped our router view element in a transition element. We defined this slide fade animation in our CSS with a number of classes. Okay, now this is a little bit more complicated than we started with, which was simply this. Okay, and that's completely fine, completely acceptable. Much more simplistic way to approach this animation. But once again, we defined the animation using the name attribute in our transition element, and we gave it a mode attribute of out-in, which caused one animation to finish before the next animation begins. Now, every time our router view changes content as a result of our paths in our router links, they're going to transition according to the slide fade animation. And there you go. Definitely practice using these transition elements. If you absolutely have to include more than one element inside of a transition and you don't want to write a number of transition elements, there is something called the transition group, but it's considerably more complicated. So dig into this, practice it, give it a try to apply it in your older projects. As I said before, once you connect your older projects up using paths and vue-router, it will truly enhance your user experience. And using the transition elements to apply very nice animations is only going to exponentially increase your user experience. Okay?